Before this goes any further, subscribe, like, and comment if you're ready to step inside a system that doesn't bruise skin, but breaks people quietly, permanently, and on purpose. The body wasn't found in a cell. It was found in the chapel. Just after 5 a.m., as Angola Prison prepared for morning count, an inmate assigned to janitorial duty noticed something wrong near the back pews. A man sat slumped forward, head bowed, hands folded neatly in his lap, as if in prayer. From a distance, it looked peaceful, respectful, almost staged. Up close, it was anything but. The inmate was unresponsive. No visible injuries. No blood. No signs of a struggle. Just a stillness that didn't belong in a place where nothing ever truly rested. His name was Caleb Moore. Caleb had been transferred to Angola less than 8 months earlier on a nonviolent conviction. He kept records for the prison library, avoided trouble, and rarely spoke above a whisper. Guards described him as cooperative. Other inmates called him careful. The kind of man who understood that survival inside Angola depended on invisibility. But Caleb had recently stopped sleeping. 3 nights before his death, guards logged repeated standing counts in his housing unit. Lights on, lights off, on again. Hours passed, no explanation given. Officially, nothing out of the ordinary occurred. Unofficially, everyone knew what it meant. Detective Laura Finch arrived at Angola later that morning, escorted through layers of fencing that stretched endlessly across the Louisiana farmland. The prison looked calm from the outside, almost serene. Finch knew better. Angola didn't need chaos to be dangerous. It ran on routine. She reviewed Caleb's file in a windowless administrative office. Clean disciplinary history. No medical alerts. No mental health flags. No reason for his sudden death. Except for one detail. 2 weeks earlier, Caleb had requested access to archived inmate labor records, documents rarely reviewed, and even more rarely approved for circulation. The request had been granted. 48 hours later, it was revoked. Finch asked why. No one could answer. She walked the chapel herself. The pew where Caleb was found had been cleaned thoroughly. Too thoroughly. The floor showed no scuff marks, no evidence of collapse. It looked as though he had been placed there, not fallen. A corrections lieutenant stood nearby, arms folded, watching her closely. People think Angola is violent all the time, he said casually. But the truth is, most of what happens here doesn't look like violence. Finch looked up. What does it look like then? The lieutenant smiled thinly. Like policy. As the day unfolded, Finch began noticing patterns that didn't appear in official reports. Inmates moved with synchronized exhaustion. Conversations stopped when supervisors passed. Water breaks delayed without explanation. Medical requests marked as pending indefinitely. She spoke to one inmate in private, a man who insisted on sitting with his back to the wall. They don't beat you, he said quietly. They don't have to. They just control everything around you until you forget what normal feels like. Finch asked who they were. The man shook his head. That's the trick. There is no one person. That afternoon, Finch reviewed overnight logs from Caleb's unit. What she found raised more questions than answers. Multiple entries were marked simply as adjusted routine. No explanation. No authorization. No duration listed. The same phrase appeared again and again. Then she noticed something else. Caleb's name appeared next to the phrase 7 times in 10 days. Finch requested surveillance footage from the chapel and the housing unit. She was told the cameras had experienced intermittent outages, intermittent enough to miss everything important. By evening, word spread through the prison that an outside investigator was asking questions. Doors began closing. Answers became rehearsed. One scheduled interview was canceled without notice. Another inmate was suddenly transferred. Finch felt the pressure shift, subtle but deliberate. That night, she returned to her hotel to review notes. When she opened her laptop, she found a new file waiting on the desktop. No sender, no explanation, just a scanned image. It was a handwritten ledger page, inmate numbers listed vertically, dates beside them, short phrases written in block letters. Light, cycle extended. Standing protocol. Restricted access. Compliance restored. Caleb Moore's inmate number appeared near the bottom. The final entry next to his name read, "Resolved." Finch stared at the screen, heart pounding. Someone inside Angola wanted her to see this, but they didn't want her to know who sent it. Minutes later, her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "You're looking in the right place. Just don't look too long." Finch glanced at the door, suddenly aware of how thin the walls felt. She didn't know who she could trust anymore. What she did know was this: Caleb Moore hadn't died suddenly. He had been processed, and whatever system had done, it was still operating quietly, efficiently, and without leaving a mark. By morning, the file was gone. Detective Laura Finch woke to the sound of her phone vibrating against the nightstand. No missed calls, no new messages. But when she opened her laptop, the anonymous ledger file had vanished completely. No trace in the recycle bin. No backup. No access log. Whoever had sent it knew exactly how to erase it. Inside Angola Prison, the response was immediate and silent. Her scheduled interviews were postponed due to staffing constraints. Requests for housing unit access were delayed indefinitely. Even the tone of the guards escorting her had changed polite, professional, and distant in a way that felt rehearsed. Finch wasn't being expelled. She was being slowed. She pivoted instead to the one place systems often forget to lock down completely: people who had already left. Her first break came from an unexpected source. A former prison nurse named Evelyn Carter agreed to meet at a roadside diner an hour outside the parish. Carter had worked at Angola for 12 years before resigning abruptly, citing personal reasons. Those reasons surfaced quickly. "They don't tell you to do anything illegal," Carter said, stirring untouched coffee. "They just redefine what's necessary." Carter described medical requests that arrived too late to matter. Inmates kept awake for days, then brought in with confusion and tremors, symptoms carefully documented but never attributed to cause. Hydration withheld just long enough to cause collapse, then restored before lasting damage could be officially recorded. "On paper, everything looks compliant," Carter said. "In reality, it's punishment disguised as procedure." Finch asked about the phrase "adjusted routine." Carter went still. "That's the language," she said quietly. "It means someone crossed an invisible line." Back at the prison, Finch began tracking inmates who had interacted with Caleb Moore in the weeks before his death. Patterns emerged quickly. 3 men had been transferred. One had been placed in long-term isolation. Another was listed as hospitalized, then discharged without a return location. Vanished. Finch requested their files. Denied. That afternoon, she was called into Warden Ellis Crow's office. Crow greeted her with calm authority, gesturing for her to sit. His desk was immaculate, his voice measured. "You're creating disruption," he said. "This facility operates on balance." Finch didn't argue. She placed copies of routine logs on the desk. Then, "Help me understand why these entries appear without authorization codes." Crow barely glanced at them. "Operational discretion." "Discretion without oversight," Finch replied, "becomes abuse." Crow smiled faintly. "That's a matter of perspective." The meeting ended without resolution, but Finch noticed something else as she left. A guard she hadn't seen before had been assigned to her escort. That night, another incident occurred. An inmate named Thomas Greer collapsed during evening count. No injuries, no fight, just sudden weakness and disorientation. He was taken to medical, stabilized, and transferred off-site before Finch could interview him. Greer's name later appeared on a routine log entry. Adjusted. Finch felt the investigation tightening around her. Then the warnings escalated. Her hotel room door was found unlocked when she returned late one evening. Nothing was missing, nothing disturbed, except for a single sticky note placed carefully on the desk. "Focus on Caleb." The message wasn't a threat. It was a boundary. Finch ignored it. She followed Caleb Moore's records request trail and uncovered the reason it had been revoked. He had been accessing labor assignment data spanning more than a decade, patterns of inmate exhaustion, Injury rates, unexplained deaths clustered around specific supervisors. He hadn't been digging into punishment. He'd been mapping it. Finch finally located one inmate still willing to talk a man nearing the end of his sentence, with little left to lose. They call it compliance, he said. If you don't break rules, you still have to prove you're obedient. He described extended standing protocols, night disruptions, denial of routine privileges, all executed without written orders. It's not about what you do, he said. It's about who they decide needs to remember where they are. As Finch left the interview room, alarms sounded elsewhere in the facility. Controlled chaos. A distraction. By the time calm was restored, the inmate had been reassigned. No forwarding location. That night, Finch compiled everything she had: testimonies, patterns, timelines into a secure offline drive. She prepared to leave Angola the next morning and escalate the case beyond local authority. She never got the chance. Just before midnight, her phone rang. A blocked number. Detective Finch, a calm voice said, "You've misunderstood your role." Finch asked who she was speaking to. "A custodian," the voice replied. "Of order." The call ended abruptly. Moments later, emergency sirens echoed across the prison grounds. Another inmate had collapsed. This time, it wasn't someone on Finch's list. It was someone close to it. As she rushed toward the commotion, Finch realized the system wasn't reacting to her investigation anymore. It was responding, and whatever it was protecting, it was willing to move faster than she was. If you think the danger has peaked, you haven't seen what happens when the system decides. The sirens stopped as abruptly as they had begun. Detective Laura Finch arrived at the infirmary to find a familiar pattern already in motion: guards posted at measured distances, medical staff speaking in clipped, procedural tones, paperwork being completed before questions could be asked. The inmate who had collapsed was conscious but disoriented, eyes unfocused, lips cracked, hands trembling as if his body no longer trusted itself. His name was Daniel Reeve. Finch recognized it instantly. Reeve's inmate number appeared twice in the labor records Caleb Moore had accessed. Not as a problem, not as an incident, as a variable. Finch tried to speak to him. A nurse stepped between them. "He needs rest," she said firmly. Within 30 minutes, Reeve was transferred off-site. By morning, his bed was empty. Finch knew the pattern now. This wasn't reactionary. It was predictive. The system wasn't improvising, it was anticipating threats and neutralizing them before they became visible. She made her move. Using a borrowed phone and an unsecured network, Finch sent copies of her findings to a federal oversight contact she trusted. Labor data correlations, medical testimony, timeline inconsistencies. The phrase that kept repeating like a signature adjusted routine. She didn't wait for confirmation. She returned to Angola before dawn, determined to confront the last place untouched by official review, the internal compliance Wing Caleb had unknowingly exposed. She didn't need a map. The access route was hidden in plain sight, beneath the administrative offices, behind a door labeled facilities. The lock accepted her temporary credentials without resistance. Inside, the air felt dead, not cold, empty. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls. No names, only numbers. Each drawer filled with procedural summaries that read like maintenance logs, not human records. Entries were brief, clinical, efficient. Inmate exhibited noncompliance indicators. Routine adjusted. Behavior stabilized. Case resolved. Finch found Caleb Moore's file. The final page wasn't typed. It was handwritten. Escalation complete. Subject, non-disruptive. Non-disruptive. Finch's phone buzzed. "You're not supposed to be there." She turned. Warden Ellis Crow stood in the doorway, alone. No guards. No raised voice. Just certainty. "You don't understand what you're looking at," Crow said calmly. "This place doesn't function on punishment. It functions on predictability. You're manufacturing compliance," Finch said. "You're breaking people without accountability." Crow stepped closer. "We're preventing chaos. You killed Caleb Moore." Crow shook his head. Caleb Moore identified a flaw. The system corrected itself. Finch raised her phone. "This ends now." Crow's expression didn't change. "No, This becomes paperwork. Security arrived within seconds. Finch was escorted out, credentials revoked, investigation terminated under jurisdictional authority. By afternoon, her access was erased. By evening, she was ordered to leave the parish. The official report released weeks later cited administrative miscommunication and isolated health incidents. No criminal wrongdoing. No systemic failure. Warden Crow announced his retirement shortly after, praised for decades of service. Angola Prison returned to normal, or what passed for it. But something had changed. 6 months later, an internal audit quietly reclassified several procedures. Certain routines were discontinued. Night counts shortened. Medical approvals expedited. No announcement was made. No apology issued. Finch received a plain envelope at her apartment one evening. No return address. Inside was a copy of a grievance form properly filed, properly logged, properly approved. Attached was a note written in careful block letters. They're adjusting again. Finch understood what it meant. The system hadn't been destroyed. It had learned. And somewhere inside Angola Prison, a machine designed to punish without leaving marks was recalibrating more carefully now, more quietly, aware that someone, somewhere had seen its outline. The truth hadn't set anyone free, but it had made the silence nervous. If you think this story ends here, it doesn't, because systems like this don't disappear, they adapt. Subscribe now, because the next file is already open.